Welcome to another edition of the Mexican Soccer Show. I'm Cesar, your host, and today we're going to dive into El Tri winning the CONCACAF Nations League for the first time, what it means for Mexican soccer, and then we'll close out with a couple other conversations regarding a big battle in Liga MX and a big game for Santa Jimenez. And looking at today's host, Lizzie is off for the day. She's on Messi Watch 2025. I believe she's always on Messi Watch 2025 for work, but we've still got Nayib here as my co-host. Nayib, how are you doing, man? How's your day going?
Great, Cesar. I mean, it's been one of those weeks of glee, that I think we haven't seen in a while with Mexican soccer and the national team. The jerseys, the really nice jerseys, couldn't have a better debut. I'd say they're gonna sell like Cheetos, basically. No, they're gonna be better selling really hot. You know, where Lizzie, she called it. No, Lizzie said that Mexico was
Yeah,
gonna win the Nations League. It
yeah.
was a final against the U.S., but she said that Mexico was gonna win it. So a lot of good positive vibes around the national team right now.
So more like hot Cheetos than Cheetos in my perspective.
Yeah.
But Nate, let's dive into it. That's our big talking point. Obviously, Mexico going into this as in the semifinal against Canada, they got that 2-0 win. Then they got a dramatic win over Panama on Sunday at SoFi Stadium. First time Mexico has won the CONCACAF Nations League. I mean, first off, to you, reaction to the win, reaction to the week. It was a successful week for
It was
Mexico.
it was a successful week, like you said, Cesar. I think this idea of the reintegration of the fan base with the team and uniting it was important for Vasco Aguirre, and the unity happens with wins, no, and
Hmm.
winning a title that has never been celebrated by the national team. Stylistically, I think we saw certain things that caught our attention. The Raúl Jimenez and Santi Jimenez, which is something that you wanted to see. We saw it over 100 and 70 minutes or so, and I think that is what we want to see more. No, consistency with an 11. I think that's going to be important in the next weeks. Um, but I think they win time. Vasco Aguirre and Marquez win time to
Yeah.
still sort of work out the plan for 2026, no, and what that will mean. At the end of it all, Mexico will be local. No, they'll play in Mexico, and then when they come to the U.S., if they have to, they'll be the local team. So how do you use that to your advantage? I mean, I think it was pretty clear that this past weekend the home team was Mexico in Los Angeles.
Yes, 100%. I think that's a good point too to bring up because going into the game, even though the U.S. and Canada were playing first and the third place match at SoFi Stadium, I mean, it was mostly Mexico fans celebrating. I will say,
Yeah.
like even for taking part in the final, it felt like what I wrote about too is that like kind of connected to that. It felt like a throwback to what things used to be for Ultity, and I'm not just saying that because Aguirre is there, and I'm
Yeah.
not just saying that because they played with a 4-4-2, which is also another throwback as well, which we could talk about later.
Yeah.
But it was this reminder. It was like, oh, that's right. There was a time when Mexico was expected to play this big game. And I'm also not saying this because Will Smith was performing before the final. Another throwback to the 90s of,
Yeah.
of the glory days of Mexico as well. But it did seem like a throwback to that. And it did kind of give you a reminder that, yes, once again, there was a time when there wasn't a question that Mexico were the undisputed kings of the CONCACAF region. I'm going to say I'm still not gonna put the stamp on that and be like, Mexico are back, baby. They
Hmm.
got nothing else to worry about. I think this is a step forward for the national team, and I think what's also important, and I think leading into that final, I would think that maybe Aguirre in his first or second stint with the national team, he would be like, yes, it is an obligation to win the Nations League. But I thought what was really interesting, and maybe this says a lot about the current status of Mexico, is that leading into that final, someone asked him like, is there pressure to win the final, and is it an obligation, obligación? And he said there is pressure, but the obligation is to play well. The obligation is to play the way that he wants to play. And I feel like that says a lot, and I like that answer. It says a
Yeah.
lot about where Mexico is currently at. which is I think is fine and being realistic, because maybe the first or second stint with Aguirre, he would say, yeah, the obligación, yeah, obviously, you got to win the Nations League. But now Mexico's at a point where things are more competitive now in the CONCACAF
You
region.
know, and there's one thing that stood out with me, especially in the game against Canada, is this idea of knowing how to suffer, no, and
Yes,
also giving the
yes,
initiative to another CONCACAF side. You know, with me in my lifetime, I don't know, Cesar. I mean, it's rare when Mexico doesn't have the possession of the ball in a game, no, that
yes,
they're in
yes.
command of the possession, and it really looked like a boxing fight, that Canada Mexico game, and Canada would give hits and Mexico would hit back, you know, with tackles, and it started with Raúl and Santi, with the two up
Yeah.
top, no, and you know, you saw Piojo Alvarado defending Alfonso Davies, which is not an easy task. You know, unfortunate injury that Davies has after this tournament. He'll be out, you know, for a couple, you know, 6 months maybe. But you know, they didn't care about the fact that they weren't the you know, quote unquote favorite. You know, they went out
Hmm.
there,
Hmm.
they respected the situation, they respected the opponent, and you know, of course, there was a very questionable call at the start of the game that could have changed a little bit the panorama of things. But overall, you know, with a very, I don't know what to say. I mean, Raul Jimenez was just out of this world, inspired.
Yeah,
You know, 4 goals,
brilliant. Yeah,
and I think, but that idea of knowing how to suffer was very noticeable against Canada.
100%. I think that's a really good thing to bring up too, and it also brings up the idea that just once again, recognizing the current status of the Mexican national team, the current status of where teams like Canada and the US are at. And maybe it's at a point where it's almost like maybe it's a bad comparison to make, but remember how the US men's national team used to play, let's say 10 to 15 years ago? Like, were there players at the same level as Mexico's players back then? Not exactly, but were they just as competitive because
Yeah.
they embraced the idea? She's like, it's okay to not be the protagonist in this situation. It's okay to recognize the opponent and react to that. And I think that there is a little bit of that where it's just where maybe and maybe I'm wrong, but maybe there's something there with Aguirre being like, you know what, like I know Mexico play usually a 4-3-3, attack-minded,
Yeah.
possession-heavy soccer, but he was just like maybe he was thinking, bring it back to the 4-4-2. Bring it back to we're gonna have Romo and Alvarez as the two holding midfielders. We're gonna have two wingers. We're gonna have the two strikers that Jimenez are gonna cause some trouble up top. And I think it goes back to the idea of maybe recognizing Mexico's current, and I say status again in the CONCACAF region, and maybe not as,
And
and I would say, yeah,
it
yeah,
also says about Aguirre, no? Because when we look at Aguirre's track record in Spain, it's teams
yes,
like
yes,
Espanyol, like
mm-hmm,
Mallorca,
mm-hmm,
Leganés, Osasuna, which are teams that mostly are gonna be defensive, no? We're gonna try to hold
mm-hmm,
ourselves well in the back and try to ride it out. You know, before coming to Mexico, let's put it, so it was obvious. I mean, you know, it's a big deal that he led Mallorca to a Copa del Rey final, Vasco Aguirre, no?
yes,
And it was with that sort of, you know, with a backline of five and two strikers up top that were very good at pressing. So it is an element that he masters, no? Again,
mm-hmm,
and that was one of the issues when he arrived to Monterrey, because in
yes, exactly,
Monterrey you have all this, you know, as we have spoken about, this team is just a massive amount of offensive options, and maybe Aguirre doesn't really understand how to deal with that, no?
yes.
And maybe he does feel more comfortable with the 4-4-2, no? And this sort of notion of, okay, let's try to be organized in the back and try to find our moments up forward. And it helps a lot though that you have someone like Raul that seems to be putting everything in the back of the net right now. You know, so it's like you have that striker that you can rely on with this sort of very stoic, very sturdy, or how can you say, combative style, no?
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that's important to bring up too, because I think let's take a moment to talk about Raul Jimenez. I mean, once again, the fact that he's still playing soccer is incredible to begin with. I mean, according to I remember reading a couple articles, like there are a couple doctors that said it was incredible that he was still alive after his head injury for Wolves when he was playing against Arsenal. and he got hit in the head off a corner in late 2020. He was obviously off the field for quite some time, and a lot of us back then were saying like, "Hey, is this guy even going to play? And if he does play, is it going to be difficult for him to return?" And it was difficult for him for quite some time, but he's really going through a renaissance right now.
Yeah,
And and you gotta, and that's something that he brought up post game when he was chatting with CBS Sports. He talked about like going through everything that he's gone through. Like he says, I forget the exact wording of the quote, but I think he said like it just proves that you have to have faith. And this is a guy who's 33 years old. It's not like he suffered that injury when he was young and he's still at the peak of his abilities. Like it's incredible to see, and it's really, really impressive too, especially when you have a player like Santi Jimenez, who like a lot of people are saying like, oh, he should be the out and out like starting striker. But no, like I think Raul Jimenez has proven enough once again that he is worthy of a spot in the starting 11. And he was, I think he easily, I don't even think that's not a controversial thing to say. Everybody knows that he was a star of last week by far.
yeah, no, and it says also of the mentality. No, I think one
Hmm.
of the things that really should be said more often, because we measure growth by titles, by wins, of course, the so wanted and desired quinto partido. But
Right.
growth is seeing someone like Raul Jimenez sitting in a table with Thierry Henry and Dempsey
Yes.
speaking perfect English, or it's Santi Jimenez giving interviews in English, and or Edson Alvarez, no, that is growth, because the
Yep.
other players notice it and they're like, oh shoot, that means I got to pick up my game as well. No, and that's part of growth as well.
Hmm.
It's unthinkable 15 years ago that a player was going to sit on the table and speak about a life situation in English,
Yeah. Yeah.
so openly, no, and but it's the maturity. Raul Jimenez is one of those players that like you said. I mean, it's the technical aspect was always there, but after that injury, there was serious doubts that he was gonna be somewhat close to that level. But
Hmm.
he is, no, and that's kudos to him, kudos to his family, the trainers, the coaches that believed in him. And look at the result now, no, and there's still endless possibilities that he can improve, and why not match Chicharito Hernandez's numbers in the next year?
Yeah.
That's possible at this point.
I like that you brought that up with them about them speaking English because that says more so about them,
Yeah,
learning another language, and it could be German, it could be French, it could be. But what that
Italian. Yeah.
says more than anything else is that these players left their comfort zone from Mexico, and whether it be the Premier League, whether it be La Liga, obviously La Liga, they'd just be speaking Spanish. But whether it
Yeah.
be the Bundesliga, whether it be Serie A, whether it be Liga, like it says a lot about the ability to go over there. And then when you play in that competitive level, then you come back and become a leader on the field. And it says a lot because in those really, really difficult, tense situations like we saw on Sunday's game, you need those players to be like, "Oh yeah, I've dealt with high pressure situations like this." And obviously, there's high pressure situations Liga MX as well, but it's on a different level clearly in Europe. But for players, I've dealt with similar situations like this in Europe, and I as a leader will be able to convey, be like, "This is fine. I'll be able to follow through with this, and it'll be okay." Not saying that if Raul Jimenez decided to come back and play for America that he would then miss that penalty. He'd probably still make the penalty, right? We know that he's fantastic at those opportunities, but I think it once again conveys the benefits of them taking those chances and then coming back as those leaders. So there isn't just one captain in this starting 11, you could say, but just like a handful of these figures who went out of their comfort zone, have really proven themselves in Europe. And some of them, it's been rocky paths. We talk about how rocky it is for a lot of these players. But then to come back in a big game situation like this and give that extra little thing that you need in order to win the Nations League title.
Yeah, no, and I think it says a lot about the pool. Even for example, with someone like Cesar and Luis Chavez, no, that
Yes.
they're in Russia, and what that sort of entails, no, at the moment with uncertainty of the geopolitics and all that. It's. I mean, even if they don't know that much about what is going on, they'll notice it because they're there, no.
Right.
So it says a lot. That takes a lot. That takes a toll mentally as well, no. The worries.
Yes.
How do I enter this country, that country? So I think they're out of their comfort zone, and that at the end of the day makes the team grow. And
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
even if you don't have these vast options, and like the US, that for example, there's players everywhere in Europe. As long as you got a couple, that
Yeah.
really embody that leadership quality and are doing great things over there, I think it can go the distance. No, and it seems that there is a good synergy between the coaching staff and the player pool, and they're
Yeah.
convinced, and I think that can be very, very uh, key moving forward.
Yeah, and I think part of that too is that like when you're thinking about if we're keeping I mean, because I wrote about it, the theme of the old school stuff like coming back for all three. Part of that too is like you look at the bench and it was like you noticed it a few times during the game. Aguirre going over to Rafa Marquez, right? Rafa like telling him a few things, be like clearly he's be like, I think we should do this, I think we should do that, and then Aguirre then conveying that to his players on the field too, right? And it's there's something extremely invaluable about having someone like because it's not like I said, it's not just uh playing that 4-4-2 that's kind of old school. It's not just having Aguirre back at the helm, but someone like a Rafa Marquez who honestly give him some cleats and he could probably still make an impact as a sub right now
Yeah,
if he
yeah,
really
yeah.
wanted to. But obviously, but no, this is someone too who he's not just a former captain and a former leader of L3, but he was making starting to make a name for himself in Europe as a coach too. Maybe he should have stayed and really like try to coach Barcelona at some point. That's probably what I would have done if I were him.
Yeah,
But this is benefiting Mexico too as well.
it's benefiting, and that was one of the things that I was really intrigued on seeing, like his hand on the job, no, or the
Hmm.
tinkering that he would do. And I think he had a lot to do with the defensive
Oh
stability
yeah.
that El Tri showed in both games, no.
Oh yeah.
And it was
100%.
with multiple faces and different motions in the system. No, it wasn't in the first game. There was some elements of like three at the back because Israel gives you that possibility, as not being a natural right back, and allowing Gallardo to move up a little bit forward. Um, the different pairing of center backs for each game was there with Johan being the constant, but I think you start to see his hand in how that team sort of evolves defensively, on both ends of the ball, no, with the ball and without the
Hmm.
ball.
100%. And I think now going back to one of the bigger questions, kind of one of the more vague questions we have about all this is what is the to you, what does this result, what does last week mean for Mexican soccer? Do you suddenly see like Mexico are now back to being the kings of CONCACAF with Aguirre? I'm curious how you think about the more general,
The
wider
general picture.
impact. Yeah.
I sense that El Tri wins back respect. No,
Yeah.
or
Good way to say it.
there was a lot of loss of respect to the history of the national team in a way, from our part and also from outside, that this generalization that there's plenty of things to criticize in Mexican football and the manners that are sort of used in the direction of things, but there is some bright spots in recent history, recent
Hmm.
memory, the good, the good performances in Olympics, the development of players like Bella and Giovanni that just came out of nowhere and were so sought after in the national team. They left their sort of mark. Like you said right now, Cesar, I think having someone like Rafa Marquez that had easily slotted himself in the Barça or La Masia, and
Yeah.
and he has influence. You see, for example, a center back like Ubarsi that plays in the national team already and Barcelona. Rafa interacted with Cubarsi, and there was some type of mentorship there. It's a big deal, no? And I think those little bright spots in general, even I go back to the days when Pardo and Osorio won a Bundesliga with Stuttgart.
Right.
Those are bright spots,
Yeah.
that among all this darkness, or however you want to see it, that Mexico deserves its respect. It is a
I think part of
footballing
those wiki
nation.
page. I think it's his wiki page. Remember correctly? I think it's still him holding up the Bundesliga title. If I remember correctly, I'll have to double check. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but it's a footballing nation, and I think it needed to retain some respect. And I think with
Yeah,
this past week, some of it came back.
100%. No, I think that's an excellent point. And also, yes, I just checked the wiki page. Pavel Pardo. It is him. When you go on his wiki page, it is him holding the Bundesliga shield. I'm not entirely sure, but it clearly is when he was in Germany. But yeah, no, I'm of the opinion that I don't know. I think it's like an easy clickable, like the click worthy thing, or like to just be like, yeah, make it go back, baby. You know, back to being the kings of Conquer. I don't believe in that just yet.
No,
I think it's gonna take some time. I
and
think
and
it's take
and,
some time. Yeah.
and watch out Copa Oro. Copa Oro is gonna be
Mm-hmm.
interesting because there's gonna be Mexican faces. You know, Luis Fernando Tena with Guatemala, Piojo Herrera
Mm-hmm.
with Costa Rica. Those teams are gonna play against it. If they end up playing against El Tri, they're gonna go out at Vasco. It's gonna be very tense because they want to prove a
Mm-hmm.
point as well. So look, CONCACAF is growing. I mean, I think also
Yes.
it can't be ignored that Panama is beat the US, no, and in the fashion that it did. You know, you might not be a fan of the style, but they got the result, no. I was a fan of the celebration with Thierry Henry. I mean, everyone loved it. The whole World
Everyone
Cup
was.
did,
Yeah.
you know. But I think that's a good example of the situation of CONCACAF. You know, a couple of years back, I think Jamaica also competed against
Mm-hmm.
the US, no,
Mm-hmm.
and Canada, you know, Canada has grown tremendously with, you know, the player pool that they have now compared to 10 years ago. I mean, it's just a way different pool that it's very, very consolidated and it's very, very competitive.
I like that you said that too, because I think what the Mexico win conveys is its result, it's respect, but also it once again, related to what you were saying there. It's just the parity that there is in the CONCACAF region, and we were in a different. If the Panama Mexico game were to be played again, there's a decent chance that the conversation we'd be having is just like, wow, look at the project that they have under Christensen. I mean, that was something that Aguirre also like praised, before and after the match, was just like the project that they have under Thomas Christensen over there in Panama. But I think, yeah, once again, it's gonna be really, really fascinating to see how the Gold Cup plays out. Just because, as you mentioned, it's not just watching out for Panama, but it's watching out for Costa Rica, watching out for Jamaica. It's getting more and more challenging, and even though maybe we don't see that at the club level in the CONCACAF Champions Cup, where you know
Yeah.
it tends to be MLS and Liga MX taking charge of those games, but still, every now and then you'll get a surprising result, and I think that still highlights it's just it is getting
But
it
you
is
know,
getting more and
even
more difficult.
even
Yeah.
even in that duopoly, or however you want to put it, between MLS and Liga MX, it is
Hmm.
very influential of the Central American, even Caribbean and the Caribbean sites. You know, because you still see, for
Hmm.
example, on MLS sites, you know, Panamanian players, Jamaican
Yeah.
players. So it does still, you know, that's where they get their competitiveness, no, in those sort of
Hmm.
matches between MLS
True.
and Liga MX.
True.
So
True.
it is a place of, you know, of growth as well still, for those
Yeah.
nations that, you know, for
Yeah.
example, I didn't know much of Alonso Martinez, a Costa Rican
Right.
forward that plays for New York City. You know, he's getting good minutes this season, and you
Yeah.
know, he's probably going to be a big player for Costa Rica in the next weeks, next months.
Yeah. And at the risk of making this the Panama soccer show, you look at the starting 11 too with Panama, and you're just like, oh, Garaskia and there's Animal Godoy. This isn't going to be easy at all. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but anyways, Nayib, just I think I got one more question regarding L3, and maybe we can have some more closing thoughts on this. But how significant is this confidence wise ahead of the World Cup? It's something Aguirre talked about after the match. He talked about just that it's I forget the exact wording that he used, but just talked about this as a significant like confidence boost for Old Three. But I'm curious about your thoughts about what this means in because there's limited opportunities to play competitive matches ahead of the next World Cup.
Yeah, no, I think they win time, and also in the sense of like the 11, no, the shape of the 11
Mm-hmm.
and how that's gonna
Mm-hmm.
look. You know, one of the things that I haven't said blurted out that much in the last hours or last, you know, since the win is the midfield. You know, it was shaky. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't
Yeah.
like the midfield, the creative midfield. No, it wasn't. It was more a midfield that knows how to suffer. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that if you plug in someone like Alvaro Fidalgo, that
Oh,
as
okay.
we know that
Yeah.
he's about, I think he's already has a Mexican passport, but there's a certain rule that he has to live a certain amount of years in Mexico, and I think he'll fulfill that next year, 2026, just briefly before the the World Cup. But I do sense that an integration of a player of that sort into this team is necessary to raise the level a little bit up. And I think that has to be a common denominator between the players and the coaches and say, straight up, we don't have that much options here. This is the guy. And if he's able to plug him in, everyone respects Vasco Aguirre. So if Vasco Aguirre says that, it's going to happen. No, and of course
Mm-hmm.
Alvaro has to remain in Mexico because there's rumors that he might be interested in going to Europe again. But if the option, if all the parts are well aware of it, I'm pretty sure he's staying. No, and he's gonna play for Mexico, and that I think adds a different feeling to the midfield of Mexico. And unfortunately, we won't be able to see that, you know, um, on a game, an official game,
Right.
but maybe a training sessions. Training sessions. He might be invited before it's official. If there's no illegal issues, if he can train with the team at least, because I think Quinones did something similar before getting the opportunity
Mm-hmm.
to actually play officially for El Tri. He was invited for some training sessions, and I do suspect that Fidalgo will do something similar, especially to get to know the players.
That is an interesting thing to talk about and just being like, okay, great job, Mexico. You did what you needed to do. But then looking at this 11, and like you said, if they are going to be playing this 4-4-2, how else can they level up from here? I mean, I guess another player that comes to mind for me, it's a teammate of Hidalgo, is Chiquito Sanchez. I know it's funny because I say that name, and I'm sure it's the same reaction that a lot of other fans have, where it's just like what immediately comes to mind is like, he didn't go to Europe and it didn't work out. There were moments last season where I really questioned his move to America, and I was like, I'm not sure if this would really work. But this season, from the occasional games that I've watched from America, like I've been pretty impressed. I mean, these stats I looked up, they were 10 days old because I tweeted about it or I put it on Blue Sky. I think you can still say tweets about Blue Sky. Anyway,
Yeah.
he was leading at that time. He was leading America in chance creation, pass completions, but also in recoveries of the ball too. And I was thinking about that. I was like, you know what? Like this guy, he still has plenty to offer here. I don't know. I think that's another possible opportunity. There is when you look at that midfield, think, you know what? Is he obviously you, because of his nickname alone? He's not nearly as big as an Edson or Luis Romo, but there's something there that maybe
and
he can provide as well. Yeah.
when Jimmy Lozano was in charge and they played the game against Germany in Philadelphia, I was able to go to that game. He was one of the standouts, no, and
Yeah.
the way that he moved on the field, and that sort of attitude of not really caring, or just being very very focused on what he needed to do offensively. Um, he has skill, no, and I think
Hmm.
that, for example, in this particular Nations League, it was very obvious that players like Orbelin hardly played, no? So that means
Yeah.
that he's already down in the pecking order. Someone like Lira moved up in the pecking order. Romo seems to be a constant, no? And I think what helps Romo is that his height, no? There was this, I
Yeah.
think someone offered a stat, in the game against Panama, the height of the team was very, very, it was a big team, no? Count everyone in. So all those little parameters are going to come into play, especially if your opponent is Sweden, Denmark, that will be considered, and it could hurt Chiquito Sanchez
Yeah.
in his options. But like he says, I mean, it is a player that, especially as the weeks progress, and we enter Liguilla, he'll get attention, especially if he's scoring goals and making big plays for a possible 4P for America.
Which transitions us over to our smaller talking points, and looking at this Liga MX weekend. Although, Nayib, do you want anything else to add about all three before we talk about the Liga MX weekend?
No, I think let's see what happens in the Gold Cup. Who
Yeah,
will be involved? Considering the Club World Cup and all the chaos a little bit in terms of which players are going to go where and whatnot. The return of Guillermo Ochoa, um,
yeah,
that's going to be interesting to see. The
yes.
consistency of Piojo Alvarado. We didn't mention Piojo, but Piojo was amazing in both games. No, yeah, I know
In
everyone.
attack and defense. In attack and
Yeah,
defense.
attacking
Yeah.
defense. So look, whatever happens, it seems right now that Raúl has a starting spot, Edson has a starting spot, Johan has a starting spot. Um, Piojo Alvarado's there too with a starting spot at the moment.
Yeah.
So it's something to see if he can grow. Will he move to a club? Will he stay in Chivas? That's something to look at as well.
100%. And I think that kind of leads us into like the smaller talking points because now what I wanted to bring up is there's be battle this weekend, really interesting battle. America Tigres, call it the modern rivalry, the clásico moderno, if you want to really call it
Yeah.
that, between these two teams. But I think there's a lot to be said about what this means for battle at the possible spot at the top between these two, depending on how other results go. But for me, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. When I look at this, I see a number of players here in the biggest Liga MX game of the weekend, and everybody's be watching in Mexican soccer, who weren't involved in the latest call up for El3. I'm going to throw in Chiquito Sanchez in there. I'm going to bring up Henry Martin, Kevin Alvarez. Over on the other side, there's Linus, there's Cordova, there's Oziel, there's Flores, there's Antuna. Not saying I do or don't want to see some of these guys in the El3 setup, but I think what stands out to me is you suddenly had what we saw what Mexico were able to accomplish. And I'm sure Aguirre and his team are now wondering how could the team level up from here? And there's going to be a big opportunity for some of these players too in this big game this weekend to be like, hey, you know what? Like, keep an eye on us as well ahead of the Gold Cup and ahead of the close of the Liga MX weekend. But anyway, your thoughts on this game and some of those players?
Yeah, no, it's definitely one of those games that it's been multiple finals. Right now, essentially, Tigres is with Guido Pizarro, a debutant manager,
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
and just making that switch from player to coach all of a sudden. Of course, many people say that Pizarro has all the tools to be a magnificent manager.
yeah.
Both teams are still alive and well in the Conca Champions. So of course their mindset is, how do I do my roster for this
Right,
game, for
right.
the next one, no? And when we look at a paper, the America schedule looks heavy, no, with
Yeah,
Cruz Azul coming as well, and with Tigres, well, it's a little bit easier because it's the Galaxy, because it hasn't looked so strong yet in 2025. But I think when you say those names, the list of players, I mean, it just shows you the magnitude of the budgets, no, of like how
right.
Tigres manages themselves, no, and really focusing lately with Mexican talent, no, like Lainez, Flores, and Nociel, getting them at a young age and bringing them over to Tigres, no, and I think that, like I told you, it seems that that America has an edge because there's more experience, you would say, but also maybe when you look at it player for player, maybe Tigres is a little bit better rested than America,
Hmm.
because America had multiple players going to South America, and South America they barely played on Tuesday, no,
Right.
so it is a difficult task to get them 100% fit for this match. So that maybe Tigres gets a little bit of an edge there, but it should be an exciting matchup for sure.
And also that said about players not being called up to their national team, I would not be surprised at all whatsoever if, and maybe there's an injury that I was unaware of. I haven't been paying attention to Liga MX over the international breaks. Maybe there's some news I missed there, but I would not be surprised if Zendejas has a really standout game. And he saw what happened to the U.S. men's national team, and he's like, probably confused as to how he wasn't called up when he's been having the form that he's having with America. And I would not be shocked at all whatsoever if he saw that the mistakes that they had and he saw that there are certain players like Diego Luna who really stepped up, basically vibes alone for, for the U.S. men's national team. And yeah, I would not be surprised if by Sunday night people are talking about the goal and assist that he had in this big game. But anyway, yeah, another
He's
player to
been
keep an
having
eye.
an amazing season. No, and
Yeah,
even last season too. It's already running to a year. And that what, for example, someone like Sambuesa did in America, being
yeah,
lefty and everything. Sendejas is overpassing the
yeah,
legend of Sambuesa in the sense of how he's dominating the games. Because they do have that similar feeling of a player, creative, can play in multiple positions. But Sendejas has been amazing. I mean, it's you don't think about this tricampeon without him. It's
yep,
like he's been
yep.
such an essential part of America that it's crazy, the level that he has.
And then just to close things out here, we have a few more minutes. Naib, let's close out with some talk about Santi Jimenez. And I mean, I think more than anything else, he's got a big game this weekend against Napoli. Napoli are in second place. They're going to host Santi Jimenez's Milan, which have been they've been okay this season. I think up to their own standards, it's been probably a bad season, but an interesting opportunity for him. We'll see how many minutes he actually gets because he obviously returned from North America, so I'm sure there's a little bit of an adjustment there. But I think there's something there to be said and about him proving his goal scoring form up in Europe. I don't think he played poorly for Mexico. I think he kind of did the role that he had to do during the Nations League. Did I expect a little bit more? Yes. Was I disappointed with him? Not really. But I think that he has to, in order to continue to keep himself in the conversation, he's going to have to continue to thrive in Europe. And I'm really curious how this game plays out for him this weekend.
I think he needs a goal. No, I think he does need a goal just to get things together and try to pick up steam. No, I think against Panama in the first half, there were some chances that he took and that it
Yeah,
looked like they could have been, goals. But I think that's going to be very key from now till the Gold Cup is recuperating the goal scoring ability. Or, he has the goal scoring ability, but it's try to be more, implement a little bit more goals and so he can be more confident in front of goal. It's sort of
yeah,
that's the issue right now. No, it's been a while since he scored, and you could tell that in these games in Nations League that there was that added pressure of trying to score a goal. No, and um, luckily, like we said, Raul was just spot on most of
yeah.
the week, so it wasn't it wasn't something that hurt the national team. Everything else, like you said, was working. No, the pressing triggers, the
Mhm.
tackles, the movements off the ball, all of that was working with Santi. Right now, they're just scoring, and I think that's something he has to figure out in the next. Hopefully he can be important in this game against Napoli.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things too, where it's just like he's doing so many things right, and obviously it's strikers, forwards, number nines. They do so much more than just finding the back of the net, right? And I think we recognize what Santi was able to do in those last two games. But then when he's gone as long as he has gone without scoring for all three, and despite him doing so well in Europe, it's at some point he does have to start picking up his form a little bit more for the national team. And like you said, in order to continue to be in the conversation, in order to continue to be like, yes, he's worthy of at least a spot in the starting 11 or to be in that picture, like he's got to be doing well in Europe. And I mean, he has been doing that, so I do have faith in the player, but it's just it adds a little bit more pressure to do well for his club team. But yeah, I'm really curious to see how that pans out this weekend and going forward.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think, and like I said, I mean, there is it's a great player to have. No, it's
Hmm.
sort of like
Yeah,
this
it's a
idea
fantastic
that
player to have. Yeah.
yeah. So it's not the end of the world if he's not scoring right now. I mean, I do think though that there is a room of improvement, especially with the tandem with Raul Jimenez and how that's gonna grow
Hmm.
and benefit both of them, no? And seeing assist from Raul to Santi and vice versa, no? And how that, but I think that also has to do with what I was saying about the creative midfield that it's still sort of developing, and
Yeah.
that needs more repetitions, I think.
Well, Nayib, I think that's it for us. I think we all had some excellent points to make there. I don't know why I said that was a weird thing to say. I think we all had some excellent points to make there. That's odd. But Good chatting nonetheless. I know you have family in town, so say hi to all of them, Naive, and thank
Thank
you
you,
to all the
Cesar.
listeners. Thank you. Congrats again to Mexico for the Nations League win. We'll see how they do in the Gold Cup. Once again, thank you to all the listeners. We've been appreciating seeing all the comments on YouTube. That's kind of cool to see all of you guys immediately be like, "Hey, you guys are back."
Hey, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, the Mexican soccer show came back, and then El Tri won something. So I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know, yo.
yeah, there's a
So
correlation there.
it's
There's a
a
correlation.
correlation. So we're starting on the right foot.
All right, I think on that note we'll close up. But thank you, Naive. Thank you to producer Amy. Thank you to Lizzie too. I know, Lizzie, you were spiritually here while you're on Messy Watch 2025. And yeah, we'll see you all on the next episode. See you all around.
Take care.